All right, three, two, one. Hello, hello, and welcome to the Gonzo Experience. I am David Gonzo Bomano, your host. We have a new episode every Wednesday morning for over 6 years now. Pretty excited. And every now and then I score what I call a big fish. Somebody who is just really well known, really famous, have done some incredible work in the world for quite a while. I reach out, I say my little prayer and hope that they'll say yes and be on my podcast. And I have one of those today. I want to welcome to the show the author of a book that I'm reading right now called The Big Leap. The author is Hendrix. Gay, welcome to the Gonzo Experience.
Thank you. Happy to be gonzoing with you today.
Are you ready for the experience?
I'm ready.
Well, Gay, thank you so much. Appreciate it. I'm really, really enjoying your book. I think it's one of those books where, you ask yourself, should I read 10 life-changing books in a year or read one life-changing book 10 times? And I think I'm going to go 10 times with your book because at this stage in my life, I'm 53. I've reached what we're going to learn about, some upper limits that have, I'll say, kind of blocked me in my life. And I'm ready to move to the next level. And that's why I was recommended your book by a friend. And it's really opening up my eyes and opening up new doors to my subconscious. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. The Big Leap, everybody. Now, Gay, when did you write The Big Leap?
I wrote The Big Leap around 2008, I think. It's been out a little over 10 years now. And it's the most interesting of all my books because it's the one that sells more every year.
Yeah.
So it must be happening by word of mouth because I know the publisher hasn't spent a nickel on it, so somebody must be spreading the word out there.
As long as you get some checks every month, you know that it's still selling, right? So
yeah, I love The Big Leap though, because every year I get a bigger royalty check than I did the year before, which is kind of unique because like with one of our other big books, like Conscious Loving, the first one we were on Oprah with many years ago, that like if you're on Oprah or something like that, it comes out of the chute as a monster book and then sort of dwindles off over the years. And there was no Oprah when Big Leap came along. So I had to do it the hard way just by getting people to spread word of mouth about it. And I'm glad it's been adopted kind of as a Bible of the entrepreneur set because that's really what it's all about. It's helping. I got the ideas from working with a lot of amazing entrepreneurs all the way from back in the 80s, all the way up into the 90s when I worked with Michael Dell and his top 3 executives there for a couple of years in a time when they were growing explosively. And so I've had all sorts of, my first entrepreneurial experience was running my own watermelon stand when I was a little boy in Florida. And they've grown since then. I remember my first day's take was something like $3, but I've been gradually doing better over the years.
That is awesome. But hey, the first $3 you invested it, right? And it just grew. that experience was an investment, right? So no, that's great. Well, so you've written 40 plus books, I believe, some with your wife as well. You guys both doing some great work in the world with the Hendrix Institute. Just a little background. You are a psychologist, you're a writer, you're a teacher in the field of personal growth, Stanford graduate. I mean, you've done some amazing things, worked with people like Michael Dell. And I remember in the book that you said Michael Dell's greatest attribute that even though he was brilliant, he was still open to learning, right? He was still being vulnerable. Is that a common trait you see in entrepreneurs that are successful?
I think they have to learn to be that way or they don't become successful. By the time a lot of entrepreneurs like get up to where Michael Dell was, they've had to evaluate so many ideas and make so many decisions. And the thing I first saw in Michael, which I just loved as a consultant, was he was the fastest person to adopt a good idea. He would look at a situation. I'd be coaching him on something and I'd tell him some new way to look at a situation and he'd try it on and they'd say, boom, okay. And next thing everybody at Dell is doing it, and those was in the days where Dell maybe had 10 or 15,000 employees. Now they have, 30,000 or whatever it is. But But I was very lucky to be there at that time, though, because I could actually see the results of what can happen when a person at the top adopts a new, better idea, like a way to communicate with people, and suddenly they can just say, okay, let's do it this way. And that's a very luxurious thing to have in organizational consulting. Sometimes you have to slog your way up through the ranks to get to the top, but it's much easier when you can do a top-down conversion.
Yep. Yeah. My grandparents are from Sicily, and there's a saying in Sicilian that basically says the fish rots from the head down. And
Yeah.
I think conversely, if the head is fresh and innovative, like a Michael Dell, there goes the rest of the organization as well, right?
Yeah, and that really highlights that point, though, about what makes people successful oftentimes is that openness to learning. They don't get their ego involved in receiving feedback. Michael would just take in an idea, evaluate it, and sometimes it'd take him a tenth of a second or 10 seconds to evaluate it. And then boom, he'd say, okay, let's look at that later, or let's go with that now. It was really quite an amazing experience for me because it was actually one of the first times that I was able to, work directly with the top person at a major organization like that later on because of that work. I did it with dozens of others, but that was a real game changer for me as well as I hope for them too.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it was a win-win situation. So for both of you.
Well,
So,
it was certainly a win-win for part of it for me because in addition to some cash, I took some Dell stock as a part of the transaction. And that proved after it split about 5 times back in the 90s, that turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made.
smart move. Smart move. uh, so, The Big Leap is the book that I'm reading right now. And then you actually have a follow-up book to that came out recently called The Genius Zone.
Yes.
And so, it's all about people finding their zone of genius and then having a strategy to make sure that they maximize it. And, what The Big Leap is about is that while people in their zone of genius often find an upper limit, you call it. And that's the point where things are going well, you're growing, you're learning, maybe making some money in a good place. But then all of a sudden, maybe subconsciously, your mind is saying like, hey, you're not supposed to be here, or you're not supposed to go any further. And you reach an upper limit where you start to sabotage yourself. You do something maybe stupid to like, you talk about Bill Clinton, in your book about, Bill Clinton really, had the world by the whats, right? I mean, he is one of the youngest presidents ever, maybe the youngest at that time, right? He is, leader of the free world, very well liked by his country, right? Economy is just booming. It's really a great presidency. And what happens? Well, the whole Monica Lewinsky story. So did he reach his upper limit? Did he sabotage himself? And so that really what I'm enjoying about that book is these examples of how people are things are going well and they subconsciously mess it up, and then getting to the why of that, and then being able to move past it. What in your life, like how did you get to the point in your life where you were able to?
Mike, you froze up there for a moment. Could you say that last thing again? I missed the last thing you said.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So basically, I'm really enjoying the stories in your book about how people are, really successful in their zone of genius, and then all of a sudden they sabotage themselves because of a subconscious upper limit. And so I'm wondering how you got to that point of in your work, discovering this upper limit issue, and then coming to the point where like, wow, I could write a book about this, and then obviously ended up becoming The Big Leap. How did that all happen?
Well, there's an old Turkish saying that says, if a bald man finds a cure, he will surely first use it on himself. And I cured myself. I was my first customer of the upper limit problem because it came to me on one occasion. I was losing some weight, and I'm about 180 now. I'm about 6 feet tall. But at that time, I was a lot heavier. And this goes back quite a number of years. But I went on this diet and I lost about 30 pounds in the first month. And, a pound a day, basically. And it just melted off me once I stopped eating sugar and stopped eating a pint of vanilla ice cream every night at dinner, and I stopped doing a bunch of things that I'd been doing. And as a result, the weight just started falling off of me. And so about a month into it, I lost 30, 35 pounds, something like that. And then my unconscious took over. I think some part of me said, I don't deserve this. You don't deserve to feel this good. And I was passing an ice cream shop, Brigham's Ice Cream in downtown Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I looked in there and there was this family eating this gigantic banana split with 3 different scoops of ice cream on it. This was a family of 4 that was eating that. But I went in there and I said, give me one. I got to have one. And the clerk says, like, where's the rest of your party? No, this is it. And so I sat down and I ate that thing just purely unconsciously. It was almost like I was in a trance. And for about 15 or 20 minutes, I felt like $1 million while all that sugar was flowing through me. And whoa, I'm walking down the street. And then I got the worst stomach ache of my life. So much so that I bent over in the middle of the sidewalk and people were saying, are you okay, sir? Are you okay? And the answer was no, I definitely was not okay. I was in the grip of what I started calling my upper limit problem. I would get to a certain place and then I'd sabotage myself. Later on in that diet, I lost some more weight. And then a friend of mine spontaneously showed up at my house with a box of chocolate caramels. Those chewy chocolate caramels, which is sort of like the crack cocaine for me at the time. It was just, I couldn't keep my hands off of it. So, but the point was that something inside me unconsciously made me sabotage myself. And I started looking into what those things were. And then I started working with other people, and particularly business executives. That was a group that I worked with a lot in the 1980s. And I would notice that they would have a big breakthrough at work, and then they'd go home and have a big, horrible argument with their family. Or sometimes it'd be the other way around. Like one fellow, he had got married, went on his 2-week honeymoon, like 2 weeks in bliss, time of his life, comes back to work on a Monday morning and got in this huge conflict at work that basically tanked all of the good feelings he'd been carrying around for 2 weeks. So that's the upper limit problem in action. And I bet if people look into their lives, they will find not one, not a dozen, but hundreds of examples of where they've done that. I certainly did once I started looking for it. And so that's the first thing to look for when you have some kind of a upset, is not what is the upset about, but why did I have this upset at this particular time? What am I sabotaging myself from feeling? I just got a wonderful fan letter over the weekend from a very well-known person, I can't say their name, but who had just discovered the big leap. And she was saying basically, oh my God, it's the first time I've ever seen my life described, because she says, I've been doing that all my life. And this is a very successful person. And that's why it doesn't matter what level of success you're at. I can't remember if I told the story in the big leap, but I worked with a man having an anxiety attack the day before he was going to get his palm prints in the Hollywood Walk of Fame down there. And his palm prints, he knew where it was going. It was going to be next to somebody, I can't even remember. It was somebody huge though, like John Wayne or Dwight Eisenhower, somebody very major in the world of entertainment. And it brought up this huge anxiety attack. Oh my God, I'm an imposter. I don't deserve it. Even though I've had 68 hit movies, a whole bunch of success, down inside, I know what a shit I am. And I don't deserve this. So he had this gigantic anxiety attack where he was considering not going down the next day for the ceremony. And his manager is screaming at him, literally, are you out of your effing mind? And fortunately, he lived up the beach from us when we lived over and had our beach place in Carpinteria. And so he was only a short beach walk down. So he came down, and I remember us standing on our balcony out there overlooking the ocean, just working on what was under there that was so shameful that made him feel like he didn't deserve this award, even though he'd been successful for 40 years. And when we found it, it was like that big fear I describe in The Big Leap. He felt he had a fundamental flaw inside himself that made himself fundamentally unlovable. And so everything was based on that old fear. If people knew who I really was, they wouldn't be so excited about buying my stuff.
He didn't feel worthy. He didn't feel like he deserved
it. He didn't feel like he deserved it. And I described 3 or 4 fears in The Big Leap that are underneath most of our upper limit problems. But that is probably the most fundamental one that the most people have, is down in there. There's some old hidden fear that they haven't ever looked at straight in the eye. And the nice thing about fear is, like here we say, fear is only excitement without the breath.
Yeah.
If you're holding your breath and looking at something, you get scared. But if you take some breaths and open up, then it becomes exciting to look at the very thing that you've been panicked about.
Yeah. So amazing stuff. And it seems to happen to so many successful people. They reach a limit. John Belushi, you talk about in the book, right? I mean, all the fame in the world, movies, Saturday Night Live, etc., starts doing drugs. And there's so many examples like that, right? They start to see some success. I think you talk about, if it's like the thermostat, we've reached our upper limit, got to go back down to our comfortable temperature, right? And we do things to bring ourselves back down instead of busting through to that next level of the thermostat.
Yeah, it's whatever you're familiar with. And I want to mention a couple of the other fears that are described in The Big Leap, because so many of my people that I talk to, like I'm going to be doing a big one-day event in October for 500 or 1,000 people, a very large group of people. And one of the things that I'm going to be working with them on is what I also call the fear of outshining, because so many people are holding themselves back because they're afraid of really letting their shine be seen in the world, really letting their full, gloryful essence be seen in the world. And sometimes it's because they think they've done something bad or something like that. But a lot of times it's due to childhood programming, like with brothers and sisters, where maybe one member of the family was the golden girl or the golden boy, and you weren't it. You were number 3 that had to try harder, or you were number 6 that had to, like a friend of mine said, my mom only wanted 3 kids. Unfortunately, I was the 6th. And, sometimes you just show up in life in a way where people have already, in a sense, prejudged you. You're the golden boy or the golden girl, or you're the one I'm always forgetting. Like I worked with one very successful person who was a real go-getter, that her mother had literally, she had 4 kids, and her mother had literally left her in the supermarket behind a couple of times because she went home with the other kids. And so she had this thing of, nobody sees me, and so once we could free her of that, then she could become a lot happier about being seen in the world. Another one of the big fears I wanted to mention too, that so many people have, is a fear of being disloyal. Like if they get successful, they're afraid it'll be disloyal to the people in their family or people behind them, or they'll leave their friends behind. And, I've actually seen it many times where somebody will suddenly get more successful, and then other people in their family will ridicule them, or, you're getting a big head or whatever, something like that. But it comes difficult to be around them if they're having some kind of resistance to your success.
Yeah. No. And so, are there some people that just don't have it, that they just keep on going, that they don't have an upper limit? They just, or does everybody have some type of upper limit, buried in their subconscious?
Well, everybody has them. It's just how quickly you're willing to look at them. You know, like a guy like Michael Dell or someone like that takes 1/10 of a second to look at something about themselves that somebody else might spend 10 years in therapy trying to look at, you know.
Right.
He's just very quick about things like that. But everybody can be that quick. There's no mystery to it. It's just gradually increasing your speed and dropping your resistance. So if somebody gives you feedback, you don't spend the next 20 minutes making them wrong or saying, you know, what do you mean? Or, you know, you just take it and take the best of it and let the rest of it go. We need to be learning machines where we just chomp up learning. And then if it's good for us, great. If it's not, let it go. Same thing with what you've learned from your parents or from your education. I grew up at a time where boys were not supposed to do things like cry or admit they were scared. It was okay to be angry or get in a fight. But like I remember once when I was a kid, my older brother, we were playing baseball with a bunch of other kids out in the field across from our house. And some kid hit a grounder and it hit a rock and caught me right in the forehead. And I went down like a shot. And my brother was playing some other position, and he came over and helped me get to my feet. And I started crying. It hurt, basically. And I remember my brother, though, saying, don't do that, don't cry, you know, because in my neighborhood, that wasn't a good thing to do for boys. You know, you got labeled a sissy or something like that. And I was something like maybe 10 years old at the time. And the last thing I wanted to be called was a sissy. So I remember kind of like choking it down inside myself until I got to the house. And then I could cry all I wanted.
Yeah. How have you dealt with that in later years? Are you been able to cry?
Oh yeah. Now it's very freeing. Like my wife says, I even cry at card tricks.
Well, my kids always laugh at me for watching a sad movie, especially if it involves one with kids, like a movie like The Champ or something, right? My kids will always look over at me because they'll know I'll be like bawling, you know.
I have exactly the same thing with my daughter too. When we would watch movies together when she was a teenager, she would often nudge me and say, okay, Dad, are you crying yet? You know, and because she was in the height of her cynical teenage years at the time.
Yep. I have a 17-year-old daughter. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I remember going to the doctor once when my daughter turned into a different human being between 14 and 17. And I remember going to the doctor at that time, and I was describing, I said, sometimes I have this, like I'll be talking to my daughter and I'll get this funny ringing in my ears. And he said, well, around here, we call that high blood pressure. Right. And I thought, oh my God, that's what it is, you know?
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. She literally has told me, you know, Dad, do you have to breathe like that? So I even breathe the wrong way, right?
I know. Yeah, it's hard for you to do anything right.
You know, I just hold my breath and pray. But so, you know, you talk about in the book too that sometimes or often there's a bottleneck, right? I think you talk about like a pebble, you know, in the garden hose obstructing the water getting through. And we often try to just continue to have the water flow. But you said something interesting that you said the pebble always wins, right? Like that the bottleneck always wins. Tell me more about that.
Well, if you're stuck, well, however you're stuck, but everybody knows the feeling of being stuck, like you're stuck in a dynamic in a relationship where it's conflict, or you're stuck inside yourself where you don't know how to change something that's been eating at you for a while. That stuckness will continue until you do one of very simple few things. Around here, we have an acronym, FACT. F stands for facing. That's the first thing you have to do, is simply facing the problem. Like if a person stands up at an AA meeting for the first time, like a friend of mine, I have a golf buddy who's got about 20 years of sobriety. And he said one of the biggest days of his life was the first day he stood up at an AA meeting and said, "My name's John and I'm an alcoholic."
Mhm.
And whoosh, because the day before or the week before, when somebody said to him, "You've got a drinking problem you need to do something about," he said, "I can handle it.
Mm.
I can handle it." Then there was that one magic day where he stood up and said, "I'm an alcoholic. I don't know how to handle it." That's a facing of a high order. FACT, the second is A, stands for accepting. At some point, we've all got to accept that thing about ourselves that we feel is hardest to accept. What is it? Is it something about anger? Is it something about an old grief? Is it some fear, something you're anxious about? Is it something you've done? But whatever it is, it's something that you haven't fully accepted about yourself. That in itself is a key step. I wrote a whole book many years ago called Learning to Love Yourself. It was the first book I wrote after I met my wife, Katie, in 1980. So what's that? 42 years ago. Yikes. I wrote Learning to Love Yourself, which is all about finally accepting whatever is the unacceptable thing about yourself. The C of FACT stands for choosing, because at some point you have to choose to move in the direction of what you want to create in the world rather than what you're trying to avoid. So many of us put our energy into what we're trying to avoid in ourselves or in other people or in the world, that we box ourselves in and don't make the crucial choices that need to be made to create a successful life. So at some point, we all have to say, here's where I want to go, and here's my commitment for how I want to get there. And the moment we do that, whoosh, things take off, because the T, FACT, stands for taking action. The choice must be followed by some kind of creative action that moves you toward where you want to go. So that's a key part of everything that we teach here, are different tools for how to do each of those different aspects of FACT. But at some point, all of those moves need to be made in order to free ourselves from whatever the old program is that's been running us. And there's only one way to do that. We call it Hendrix aerobics. You've got to go, and look inside yourself in a state of wonder. If you're out there making the world or somebody wrong, I got you. Just turn that inside and say, why am I creating this particular conflict right now? Or, why would I be choosing to be 50 pounds overweight? Or, why would I be choosing to be in this particular conflict with my partner at this time? So the moment you begin to take healthy responsibility for things is a very key moment in your life.
That is huge. That is huge. The FACT acronym. I mean, just right there, somebody going through that can completely alter the course of someone's life. And you said something very powerful, that often we're putting our energy into the thing that we're trying to avoid, which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's more common than we give it credit for, right?
Well, everybody's got what I call a personality number one and a personality number two. Personality number one is focused on how can I get my needs met in a straightforward way. Personality two, though, goes way back into childhood. It kicks in when we can't figure out a way to get our needs met in a straightforward way. And so we do something over here in personality two, throw a tantrum or get sick or stumble and fall and cut our lip or do something that gets attention, but for some negative thing we've done that creates pain. And so a lot of times people get so much of a reward for that that they just keep doing those things over and over again. And, like I had a fellow over in the realm of relationships. My wife and I have written a number of books about relationships, such as our first one, Conscious Loving, that we were first on Oprah with 30 years ago. And we've written a number of other books in that field. And so we do a lot of studying of what goes wrong in relationships and how to fix it. And that's one of the things that people have most difficulty with, is simply asking for what they want in a straightforward way, rather than throwing a tantrum or creating an argument or getting sick or having an accident or some other way of getting that need met. So one of the big important things to do in life is to look carefully inside and say, okay, how can I get what I want here in this world in a straightforward way? Rather than taking all these roundabout paths, such as through creating conflict.
Yeah, it's huge. A book I read a few months ago is covering a little bit what you're talking about. You ever hear of the book called "The Obstacle Is the Way"?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, it came out.
But it sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, it came out 5 years ago, and essentially, it's like, most people see this big obstacle, and instead of like, going through it, working through it head on, they try to go around it, right? And that's and what you're talking about is that's maybe when sicknesses will appear or sabotaging ourselves will appear, instead of just facing it, accepting it, choosing to move forward and taking action to get through it.
Yeah, that's very useful information. The things I used to see as obstacles, now I just see as a series of 10-minute sweaty conversations.
That I love that. I love just do your acronym, right? Just fact it up, right?
Fact it up.
I was interviewing a business owner a few years ago, and I asked him what his core values were as a company. And one of his core values was the word Buffalo. And I said, he lives in Cleveland. So I'm like, why Buffalo? Do you like the Buffalo Bills? He's like, oh, no. I said, well, why Buffalo? And he goes, well, Buffalo is the only animal that when there's a storm coming, their instincts have them run towards the storm, because the duration of the storm is shorter if you run towards it, get it over with, and move on. If you're running away from it, you actually experience more of the storm. And I thought that was so insightful, right? Running towards the storm.
Yeah, really. Isn't one of the slogans of the Navy SEALs or one of those groups something like "Run toward danger"?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so. So okay, I could talk to you for hours and hours. Fortunately, unfortunately for me, you're a busy man. So I don't want to take up your whole afternoon. But I know, I've been to your website, and there's only one of you, and there's only one of your wife. So I know that you've created some systems to scale what you do to help people. So people, are listening to this podcast and they're like, oh my God, this is just what I need, in my life, in my relationships, in my business, or something else, maybe spirituality, whatever the category is. How can they learn more about you, learn more about your coaching programs, and engage with the work that you've done to move them to the next level?
Thank you for asking. The best place is to go to hendrix.com, HENDRICKS.com. That's kind of the main jumping off place to all our different activities. We have other websites that have our e-courses and another one for our nonprofit foundation and things like that. But the big one is hendrix.com. And if you go there, you'll see a list of our trainings. And we currently do several different types of trainings. We do one that is like once a week for 8 weeks, like on a Thursday afternoon for 3 hours for 8 weeks. We do another one for 3 days. And so all sorts of different ways that people can access our work. And then we also do couples courses. And sometimes these are virtual courses over Zoom, or sometimes they're live courses, usually here where we live in Southern California. So there's all sorts of ways to get to know us, and I really encourage people to drop by and also check out our nonprofit foundation too, because it has a lot of free resources about our work that people find useful, things on breathing and communication and all sorts of relationship work and things like that.
Super fantastic. Obviously, you love what you're doing. I think it says right on your website that you are 77, and I know you've made enough wealth where you could probably retire and travel and just hang with your wife, but you love what you're doing so much. Like why retire, right?
Exactly. Well, we've been around the world something like 33 times or more. I
Wow.
think last time we counted in about several million frequent flyer miles. So, yeah, I've done a lot of traveling, but I did it more on the middle part of my life. And now, the last 20 years, I've really enjoyed here being in my part of paradise. We live in a beautiful little mountain valley in California, but it's only 10 or 12 miles from the ocean. So, you can go down and walk on the beach and walk in the mountains in the same day. And so we do a lot of our trainings here from our beautiful home. And I really enjoy hanging out here. I think I did one live thing this past year. I flew to New York to talk to a group, but most of the time I can just hang out in my own piece of paradise. And we've been here now for a little over 20 years. We found our dream house here about 20 years ago and moved over here. So it's really been fantastic.
Terrific. Well, a life well designed and well earned. So congratulations. It's when I meet people like you, it becomes more and more, just a reality that your life is very much instigated and created by your thoughts and your actions. I saw a speaker a few weeks ago. Or a few months ago, you may know a speaker named Larry Wingett. I don't know if you ever heard of Larry. He's big in the Southwest, and he's got a great saying that you might like this saying. His tagline is, "Your life is your own damn fault." You could take that two ways, good or bad, right? So,
That's really good. What part of the world do you live in, Mike?
I live in Rochester, New York.
Rochester, New York. Okay.
Rochester, New York. Yeah. So if you were in New York City, I'm about 5 hours north. Yeah.
I think I've, what's that big throughway that goes up the top part of New York? I drove that one time. Does
Well,
that go through?
there's Route 90, Route 90, you hit
That's
Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, Albany. I mean, it literally goes right across. You could start in Boston on 90 and then you could end up in Seattle. But New York State is the only place where you have to pay to be on Route 90. The rest of it's free.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, very much, very much so. Excellent. Well, Gay, this has been super, super fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing some heartbeats with me today. Very glad that you're putting this great work into the world. I am certainly always looking at my upper limits, and I'm going to go to your website and look at what I can do to bring my life to the next level. Before you go, just one question. This is more of a personal question. Is there a common coaching program that entrepreneurs tend to gravitate to out of all the work that you're doing? Is there something more common that entrepreneurs will do with you?
Well, there's one thing that entrepreneurs do that's not exactly taking our trainings, but I do a 2-hour Big Leap intensive with one individual at a time. It's often a C-suite executive from a company that sometimes the company pays for it, but it's a 2-hour intensive and then follow on coaching days, usually once or twice a month. And so there's a place on my website that says how to work with Gay Hendrix, and it will show you how to do that if you want to do that. That's kind of how I spend a lot of my time. If I'm ever busy, it's because I'm busy doing those 2-hour intensives with executives, or sometimes lately I've been doing a lot with up and coming young actors and actresses. I live near Hollywood, and so I get a lot of traffic from that have read the Big Leap. And so also, and so we're a partnership, and we've trained about 200, I think, coaches around the world that also do our work.
Great. Excellent. Well, Gay, thanks again. Appreciate you and your wife and all the great work you've done. And I wish you, continued massive success.
Same to you. Sounds like you're in your genius zone, and blessings to you.
I appreciate that. I also want to thank the Gonzo family for listening and or watching today. Once again, every Wednesday morning, we have a brand new episode with incredible guests. Want to make sure that you guys have a great day and make sure to stay awesome.